الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى جل جلاله وعم نواله. والصلاة والسلام على سيد الحبيب المصطفى صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في القرآن المجيد: وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم. فلا أعظم هناك مما عظم الله عز وجل. وقال البوصيري: فاق النبيين في خلق وفي خلق ولم يدانوه في علم ولا كرم. My dear brothers and sisters, the discussion we're going to have today, based on the poster, said the clemency of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is that right? It said the clemency of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Let me just speak about those terms first, just so we understand what we're here for. Clemency and forbearance, generally in Arabic, refer to hilm. Hilm means a person who's able to absorb a lot, not react in a hasty manner, not react with foolishness or silliness, but to deal with things in a very calm and collected way for the best. And anybody who's a leader, anybody who's a manager, anybody who administrates anything, anybody who looks after anything, who is in charge of something, they will notice that there's always going to be challenges in your life. It doesn't always go according to your plan. While most things may go according to plan, some things will always come up which will challenge you. And it requires a human being to be flexible. It requires them not to have a short fuse, not to get angry too quickly, have a lot of patience, have a lot of perseverance, not to feel that they fail just because something didn't go the way they wanted it to just give the whole thing up. A number of these different qualities, whether that means running a household, whether that means running a masjid, whether that means managing a department, whether that means, supervising a number of employees, all of these things are like that. It could be a volunteer job, it could be a paid job, whatever the case is. It doesn't always go according to how we would like it. But we have to be flexible enough, and this is where I think we can learn from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, both on our micro level, individual level, and also on a macro level, in terms of understanding what is Islam's perspective towards a lot of the stuff that goes on in the world in the name of Islam. One is that there's a lot of stuff that takes place, there's a lot of incidents, there's a lot of attacks and lots of things that take place around the world constantly, day in and day out. There's always depressing news. It just becomes a lot more depressing when it's to do with Islam and there's the name of Islam within there, the perpetrators are Muslim. So inshallah, the whole point of this talk is to look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ in the short time that we have, and understand from the seerah, the blessed lifestyle, how the Prophet ﷺ reacted in a default state. What I mean by that now is that you will find hadith in the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi, for example, that discusses in depth the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ in detail. You will find one hadith there which says that the Prophet ﷺ on one occasion, he became so flustered that his cheeks became as red as though some seeds of a pomegranate had been crushed on his cheek. He became extremely angry in certain cases, and that is there. And he makes it very clear that if the boundaries of the Sharia, boundaries of the sacred law, if Allah's rights were to be violated, then he would clearly get angry for them. So the Prophet ﷺ wasn't this man who was so laid back that he had no idea how to control things, and people would walk over him. Let's get that out of our mind. There are instances where the Prophet ﷺ did make certain judgments based on avenging something. However, what we want to look at is what the default state was. Because unfortunately, what we see around the world, in some of those that seem to represent the Muslims, and definitely have a bigger name than the vast majority. They are a minority, but they seem to make bigger headlines and evoke evoke a lot more response than the vast majority. Their default state seems to be of anger and violence and killing and murder, annihilation, destruction. It seems to be their default state. It's like if you saw something nice come from them, that would be like an accident or an exception to the rule. And this is where we need to understand now. I know there's a lot of factors in the world when you look around and how Muslims are wherever, in many cases, Muslim world, non-Muslim world, Myanmar currently, the Rohingya Muslims, where there's a huge amount of oppression, and that does make a lot of people's blood boil, evokes a huge amount of sympathy. How do you channel that sympathy? How do you channel that anger? How do you channel those feelings? That's what we need to understand, because that's the most complicated thing. It's about what to do in the right way, without making a greater mess, without making the matter even worse than it's supposed to be. That's what's important. Let us look at the Prophet ﷺ. Firstly, I must quote from the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Qalam, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You are on the sublime character. Azim. You are on the mighty character, sublime character, highest form of conduct and character. This is what Allah is addressing him and saying. And as some of the scholars have said, that لا أعظم مما عظم الله عز وجل. There can't be anything greater than what Allah considers to be great. Allah is the greatest. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Azim. Allahu Kabir. Allah is mighty, majestic. He is full of grandeur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has everything at his disposal. When he says something is great, then that must be great, and there can't be anything greater than that. So if the Prophet ﷺ is being addressed by Rasulullah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to say, you are on the greatest of character, then that must be the greatest, and there can't be any greater character than that. Now, clemency and forbearance comes from a good character. It's one of the most difficult things to actually imbibe in oneself. This has actually led one of the great poets of medieval times, great poet of Egypt, Busiri, to actually say, in comparing the Prophet ﷺ to other prophets, forget the rest of creation, forget you and I, he is comparing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to the other prophets, all of those 124,000 or so that have graced this world. And to say about them, and the comparison is this, he says, فَاقَ النَّبِيِّينَ فِي خَلْقٍ وَفِي خُلُقٍ. He has superseded, he's gone transgressed beyond, he's transcended beyond any of the other prophets, both in terms of who he was, how he's made, and in terms of his character. There is just no comparison. In fact, he goes on to say in another place, he says that the other prophets, you know, when you have writing in Arabic, you have the alif ba ta tha, alif lam mim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, and we have the harakat, we have the vowels. In Arabic, the vowels are not letters. In English, vowels are letters. They take up whole spaces, A, E, I, O, U. But when it comes to Arabic, you can actually get away with much less words, because the vowels are not actual characters. They are just symbols. The dhamma, fatha, kasra, etc. The comparison he gives, he says that the other prophets are just like the harakat. They're like the vowels, the symbols. And the Prophet ﷺ is like the words. That's his mission. That's what his message is. That is how much more superior it is. And this is not to denigrate any of the other prophets. They are way much more higher than any human being can ever reach. Any other human being can ever reach. That is the status of the Prophet, because it's a God-given status. They're chosen by God. You can't work to be a prophet. You can't acquire it. You can't study for it. It is something that Allah chooses somebody for. Now, when Busiri is actually comparing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to them, he doesn't need to compare the Prophet ﷺ then to the rest of humanity, because the rest of humanity is way far from even any of the prophets. And the Prophet had the greatest of status. They were the most comprehensive role models. They were divinely inspired, divinely protected. They didn't sin. This is our belief about them. And then he says, وَلَمْ يُدَانُوهُ فِي عِلْمٍ وَلَا كَرَمٍ. They could not even come close. Meaning, the other prophets could not even come close to the Prophet ﷺ, neither in knowledge and neither in benevolence. I'll just give you one point that highlights the difference between the other prophets and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And that just tells you where our status is. Musa ﷺ asked Allah that he wants to see him, that he would like to be able to see him with his eyes. And Allah says, لَن تَرَانِي, you will never see me. Finally, when there was a bit of a persistence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fine, look at that mountain. Just look towards that mountain. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's light was manifested, Musa alayhi salam fainted. He fell unconscious. That was just too difficult for him to be able to comprehend and encompass that. That's just one example. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is actually chosen to go out of the realms of this world and go up through Jerusalem up to the 7th heaven. And when you look at the hadiths related about the Mi'raj, about the ascension in the Bukhari and Muslim, you'll be amazed. He says, I then got to a place where Jibreel alayhi salam, the archangel, who has pretty much seen all the prophets and he's been the main messenger among the prophets. He had been accompanying him all of this time to all of the various different places. Finally, they came to what they call the Sidratul Muntaha, the furthest locked tree, as mentioned in Surah Al-Najm. When he got there, the hadith mentions that Jibreel alayhi salam said, now we've come to the absolute limit of the universe. Beyond this, I can't even venture. Even the Archangel Jibreel, who is, you can say, among all of the angels, he is the master angel, the Archangel. He says, I can't even go beyond here. The Prophet ﷺ had to proceed alone to meet with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah invites him to meet him. Forget just looking. Allah invites him for a meeting. Some of the narrations mention here that while he's there, now you can imagine you're out of the universe. This is not even something that you can even comprehend. You're out of the universe. What does he mean by universe? Time, space, air, microwaves, whatever you want to put into that universe from physics or however you want to look at it. He's beyond that. It's emptiness, it's devoid, it's a void. God knows what that is. And he says that he hears the voice of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. And the question is, why did he hear the voice of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu? Because when he's there, he could feel so alone. There's nothing. You're not used to even, there's no experience like that. Just so that the Prophet ﷺ doesn't feel alone, he's given a familiar voice of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu. Of course, it tells you in the same breath that the great status of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, may Allah bless him. May Allah have mercy on him. We know that. Then he goes to meet with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, according to a number of the Sahaba, the majority opinion is that he saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, just look at that compared to any of the other prophets. All I'm doing is, I think we haven't understood the position of Rasulullah. That's all I'm trying to mention here. The comparisons I make is just to show what status. Are we missing something? Are we missing something? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower His abundant blessings upon him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us His company and shafa, intercession on the Day of Judgment. So now, numerous incidents during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam about how to act in especially challenging situations. Let's just say an employee of yours is giving you trouble. Now, you have a few responses, right? If you're the person who makes the decision, you can say, just get rid of him. How do you know the next one that comes in? You need somebody to work for you, right? You need somebody to fill that space. That's why you have them here. If you just get rid of them, then the next person might be even worse. How do you deal with that? They launch a personal attack against you. How do you deal with that? Do you get personal about it? Do you try to deal with it in a professional manner? How do you feel? The most important thing is, how do you feel? Because that's going to govern how we react. Now look at the Prophet ﷺ. I would say that some of the most profound narrations in this regard are related from one Sahabi, whose name was Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. He started off when he was about 10 or so with the Prophet ﷺ. His mother said, look, I've got a child who's 10 years old, he's going to serve you. He's going to be at your service. And the Prophet ﷺ took him on. And this Anas radiallahu anhu, Ajib, there's a hadith related by Imam Abu Dawud. Anas radiallahu anhu says that I stayed with him for 10 years. He stayed with the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, the whole Madani life. The Madani life, the one in Medina, that was for 10 years. The Prophet ﷺ, he says that I served him for 10 years. Never once did he say to me, oof. Or we'd say, or whatever sounds, onomatopoeic sounds that people make. Never once. No sign of displeasure like that. No sound of displeasure like that. Not once in 10 years. Tell me, can you even do that with your children? Can you do that with your employees, that you never say anything? In fact, never for anything that I had ever done, probably incorrectly, did he ever say, why did you do that? Or something that I was supposed to do but I abandoned, he never said to me, lima taraktahu, why did you leave it? Subhanallah. The reasoning that was given is that whatever Allah has decreed is going to happen. That's the motto. Now, clearly, if you use that, it's not going to work for us all the time, because at the end of the day, the only reason the Prophet ﷺ is saying that to Anas radiallahu anhu about you is that he knows Anas is doing his best. When you know somebody is doing their best and they don't intend some kind of violation, some kind of wrongdoing, some kind of blunder, then the character says, then you leave it to Allah. You can't discipline somebody who did something by mistake. I remember once I used to attend a class with another teacher of mine who attended the same class. It was a class on qira'at, on 7 qira'at. And I was together with a teacher of mine who I'd studied for several years with other subjects. But we both then happened to be in the same class with another teacher. So we were both students now under this teacher. And this teacher wouldn't teach if any of us were missing. So then that lesson would be wasted in a sense if any of us was missing. I forgot about the class after Asr and I went home. And I only realized later when somebody came and told me, or there were no phones in those days, I didn't have a phone in those days, this was in India, that they're waiting for your class. Somebody came all the way, so I quickly rushed there and sheepishly, embarrassed, I sat down and it was obviously too late for the class, but my sheikh, for whom this class had actually been convened, I said, I'm really sorry. He says, did you do it on purpose? I said, no, I didn't do it on purpose. He said, then it's fine. His akhlaq was wonderful. Did you do it on purpose? Now, obviously we had a limited amount of time when we had to finish the Quran off in that time for those 7 qira'at. And clearly every moment was very valuable. But then this was his answer, and I learned from there. Because I like to fly off the handle sometimes. So I learned from there. This is the Prophet ﷺ's character. We actually call this teacher Sufi Sahib. Because that's what he is. He's just too cool. He's just, Allah bless him, and that's how he is. Now, of course, you know that somebody's making a blunder. You can't just say, okay, let it be. You have to do something. It's your responsibility to do something about it when somebody's purposely doing wrong. And this is really sad, because a friend of mine who worked for British Gas in installing smart meters, there's a big movement in the UK of getting smart meters in every house. And all these big energy companies, that's what they're doing. So a friend of mine used to work for British Gas. They've got a very disciplined job. He was actually headhunted for a managerial position in another company. When he got there, it was chaos. And the people causing a lot of the chaos were our people, unfortunately. Religious people, namazi people, salat people, people who are concerned about their salat apparently. You're supposed to fit 6 meters a day. That's the average, that's the kind of the encouragement. It's a bit ambitious, but it's still, they would do 2 a day. Supposed to start at 8 o'clock, they would start at 10 o'clock. And it's all tracked because the vans are all tracked. And everybody can tell. Problem is, the reason they were getting away with it for so many months is because of the racism card. The original manager, the head manager there, he's an Englishman, and the rest of them, these particular employees, they're Indian Pakistani in origin. Right? So it's a racism card that they were playing until now. The unions get involved and so on and so forth. So when this friend of mine got into that job, that manager put him in to supervise those individuals. Within a few days, he discovered that he's given me a very troublesome team. So he talked to him about it. And he said, well, that's what you got. You've got to do this job now. That's your job, right? That's what you're getting paid for. They say that iron is only cut by iron. So mashallah, he managed to sort it out. He brought the people and he says, look, it's not going to work. Okay, you don't do 6 meters, but you need to do at least 4. The guy behaved for a few days, but eventually he resigned himself and he took off. He knew it's not going to work anymore. This holiday is finished now. Now this is just really sad. So in that case, the manager, my friend who became their supervisor, couldn't say, oh, it's all biqadarillah, so let it go. It's only when you know somebody's doing well and they're trying their best, then after that to push them more, that's oppression. But if they're not doing, then your responsibility is to take stock and to do something. Clearly, the Prophet ﷺ's ability in 10 years never to say anything but show mercy to Anas radiallahu anhu. This has to come, this is not normal. This has to come from somebody who Allah has said to him, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. They can't come from anywhere. For 10 years you never say anything to anybody. Give me that example. Give me that example. The Prophet ﷺ, another Aisha radiallahu anha says that in narration of Abu Dawud, ما ضرب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شيئا قط بيده. The Prophet ﷺ did not strike anything, not anybody. She didn't say any wife, and he had 9 wives at one time. Now that would have been a big statement, because unfortunately in some cultures that thing goes, it's okay, and I'm quite surprised that it still exists in some places. Anybody that asks me this question, that a wife, when she says that I'm being domestically, hit and so on, I say, go to the police. No, I can't do that, it's my husband. So what else are you going to do then? If there's nobody else to help you, what else are you going to do? You're going to keep being beaten up? Go to the police. What else am I going to tell them? You tell me. Because this is a 20-year-old marriage. I've said, is there anybody that can? He doesn't listen to anybody. That's the answer. He doesn't listen to anybody. That's the answer I generally get. So what do? They are basically just relying on the fact that you are in this victimized state, vulnerable, and you won't tell anybody. It's a very complicated scene. May Allah remove that from people. May Allah remove that from people. Another person I know, a friend of mine, many, many years ago, we both got married, I think, no, he got married later than me. I never touched my wife like that. Never. Alhamdulillah. He told me, once emailed me, he called me, he says, man, I beat my wife up. I said, what? Why do you do that for? You can't do that. Now, the conclusion we drew is because he'd seen others do the same thing. He thought that was what you do. Alhamdulillah, since that day, as far as I know, he doesn't do it again. A lot of this is tradition. Sometimes a lot of this is tradition. You see somebody else, you think that's the way to do it. You don't know any other way to do it. That's not the Prophet ﷺ though. That's a culture. That's what we have to really make an understanding, really a comprehension in our mind. Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, the youngest of them, is saying that the Prophet ﷺ did not strike anything, hit anything with his hand. وَلَا إِمْرَأَةً وَلَا خَادِمًا. Neither any woman, neither any khadim and servant. Because in those days you had servants and slaves. Slaves, people did beat them up unfortunately, and the Prophet ﷺ used to tell people off for doing that. In fact, on one occasion he saw a Sahabi doing this, and he said, you know what? Allah has more power over you than you have over that slave. So if he's made a mistake and you're doing this to them, then what about your mistakes to Allah? What could he do to you in the infinite ways that he could do something for you? That's the Prophet ﷺ's default state. So Aisha radiallahu anha says, neither woman nor khadim, unless he was in jihad in the path of Allah there, then he did strike somebody once. And that was just like, he just kind of touched somebody with a spear, and that person that was it, that was his death warrant signed. Prophet would be there in battles, but he hardly struck anybody like in a proper, it was just this touch that he gave to somebody. وَمَا نِيلَ مِنْهُ شَيْءٌ فَيَنْتَقِبُ مِنْ صَاحِبِهِ. Never was he ever challenged by something, afflicted by something, and then personally that he actually avenged it. إِلَّا أَن يُنْتَهَكَ شَيْءٌ مِنْ مَحَارِمِ اللَّهِ. He had his line drawn though, unless it was something to do with the rights of Allah. Then there was no compromise. Because you don't mess with Allah's words and Allah's rights. Personally speaking, the Prophet ﷺ was rahmatul lil alamin. Anas radiallahu anhu says that once, now this was Anas's personal experience, now he gives another experience which is related by Imam Bukhari. Anas radiallahu anhu says that once I was walking with the Prophet ﷺ. He had a Najran. Najran is, I believe, a place towards the south of Arabia, maybe in Yemen, right, where the Christians came, or maybe it's in the north. This is where you got these nice sheets, these kind of shawls were made there. So you had a Burdun Najraniyun, a Najrani shawl. That's what the Prophet ﷺ had on. These Najrani shawls had a hem. The finishing, the hem, it was a bit rough. That's what these were. He had it on. This Bedouin came up. Now, do you know what I mean by a Bedouin? Bedouin are generally people who live out in the deserts. They're quite uncultured, right? They're very rough and tough. They don't have particular, what we would, city urbanized people would consider to be civilized speech. They just ask it the way it is, right? They don't have any veneer. They just say it the way it is. And they can be quite rough and tough in their approach. And the Prophet ﷺ had to deal with them because he was a prophet to them as well. So now what happens is, this one of them catches him up, takes hold of that sheet, of that shawl, and he pulls it roughly, like, to attract attention. And then he says to him, and you know why he did this? Not because he had a gripe or he had some axe to grind. He wanted something from the Prophet ﷺ. And look at the way he says it, look at his word choice. He says, Murli min mali Allahi alladhi indak. Give a command to give me some of the wealth of Allah that you have. Allah is giving you certain wealth, it's Allah's wealth, you need to tell somebody to give me some of it. Now, generally a cultured person will say, I need to approach him with a pleading tone, I need to be humble. Now these guys didn't get all of that. Now, tell me something, how many of us actually stop to think in that kind of situation? That where is that person coming from? Because it sounds weird. Normal people didn't do this. It wasn't like he was used to people doing this to him every day, and thus he thought, okay, it's just another guy doing it. No, this was random. Only somebody with full control, by default state of clemency, can do this. The Prophet ﷺ turned around to him and smiled at him. فَضَحِكَ فَالْتَفَتَ إِلَيْهِ فَضَحِكَ. He smiled at him. And then after I said, okay, give him so and such and such. I know I couldn't do that. If I get cut off and somebody pushes in front of me, just driving, and they haven't even hurt me yet. Right? They haven't touched my car, they haven't done anything. And I'll get aggravated. There's another narration related by Imam Hakim in his Mustadrak, very interesting. Now, there's among the Jewish tribes of Medina Munawwara, there were three prominent Jewish tribes of Medina Munawwara. There's a number of them that have become Muslim, a minority. They became Muslim. There was Abdullah ibn Salam and others. So there's one particular individual whose name was Zayd ibn Sirna, or Surna, Zayd ibn Surna. He was from the Jewish tribes, but he is considered to be one of the most honored and respectable individuals from among them who are converted. So among those who are converted, he is the most respectable individual. Like you can tell, he's somebody who thinks. He wasn't somebody who's randomly converted. He tells this story. He says that I had observed, based on the Torah, the Old Testament, I had observed every sign of the new prophet on the Prophet ﷺ. that he is the new prophet, there were just 2 signs that I had left. So there were signs in the Old Testament that mentioned what this new prophet would be like, and I had identified all of those signs except 2 signs. Those 2 signs were, does his forbearance, clemency and patience go beyond his ignorance? Are they more powerful than his ignorance? Does he act in a foolish way if he's challenged by something of that nature, or is he going to act in a forbearing way? And when somebody acts foolishly with him, it only increases him in forbearance. So number one, in the beginning, right off the default state is that he has a more temperate, more clement, a more forbearing and patient approach. And the more somebody acts foolishly with him, one is that, okay, you start off and you're like, okay, I'm going to be calm about this. And then the person just carries on and gets even worse and worse and just rubs you the wrong side. Eventually, when are you going to break? With the Prophet ﷺ, he would never break. It would actually make him even more clement, which is built another way. Subhanallah. It's just really strange. May Allah grant us that ability. May Allah grant, because there's a hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ, it says that the person who has been deprived of compassion and softness, then it is as though he's been deprived of all forms of goodness. So those of us who take pride in being harsh and rough and tough and strict and so on, we have to think about how much of that is praiseworthy, really. Yeah, strictness, discipline is a good trait, but harshness is not. How can you be strict and disciplined, but it be done in a compassionate way? That's the difficulty. And it's only the Prophet ﷺ that managed to combine these things. I'll just give you another simple example. Fudail ibn Iyad was considered to be one of the greatest ascetics, one of the greatest abideen, ubbad. In fact, he was called the Ya Abid al-Haramain, the worshipper of the 2 holy sanctuaries, because he went there and he did so much worship in Makkah, Mukarramah, Medina, Munawwara. He was given that title, I think, by Abdullah ibn Mubarak, rahimahullah. He started he was a highwayman. He started with a turban and then he became very reformed and became one of the greatest waliullah. He had a son, and the scholars mentioned that his son was even more fearful of Allah than him. There was a certain surah in the Quran which I think was Alhaakumut Takathur, that if it was ever read in front of him, it would just really, really, really change his state. Fudail ibn Iyad was an imam in the masjid. His wife, the mother of his son, made him promise that you should never read that surah in your salat. In Maghrib or Isha Salat or Fajr, you should never read that surah, because she feared for her son. On one occasion, he didn't realize his son was present and he recited that surah thinking his son wasn't there. Okay, this is my chance. His son passed away because of the fear from this. Now, I know these are extreme stories, alright? This is not something you observe every day. He is seen completely composed on that day. He is seen completely composed, not breaking down or anything. He knows what has happened, he obviously feels it, but his demeanor. Scholars have compared that and said, was that the correct approach? To keep yourself so composed that you don't even weep. Allah knows whether he wept in privacy or not. But look at the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ is invited by his daughter because her child is on the last throes of this life. First he says, look, gives her a message that for Allah is whatever he takes and so on. So she insists that he come along, so he went with a number of prominent Sahaba, companions. When he got there, he held the child and he saw his last throes and he started weeping. Now, some of the Sahaba there, they felt a question in their mind which they vocalized. They said that, Ya Rasulullah, you doing this? Because remember, the tradition had been that when somebody died, people would wail. They would actually professionally employ women who would come, and they were professional wailers. They would cry, tear their garments, their hair was all over the place. Otherwise, if you didn't do that, it meant that you didn't really give a good sending off to your deceased. These are cultural things. So Islam came and done away with that. But people then thought that you couldn't cry at all. Can you see how one extreme, trying to curb that extreme, can take you to another extreme? So when the Prophet ﷺ, he has two conflicting emotions here. One of the emotions is the natural emotion you feel when somebody of yours or somebody you're close to is about to depart. That's a natural emotion that wants you to cry. The other is the ruling that nobody should wail. It's only the Prophet ﷺ who is, when you get these conflicting pressures, where one tells you to do one thing, another one tells you to do something else, that he can do the right thing. So he told them, he says, this is mercy. And this is completely fine to cry and weep a bit, as long as it doesn't, lead to the wailing. Another similar example. Imagine here that somebody comes in, one of those Bedouins, one of those Arab, right? Now you don't generally get them in London. Let's just say somebody came as a refugee and he came into this masjid and started urinating in the corner. Well, not here, maybe in the passage down there. Tell me, what are you guys going to do? What are we going to do? They're like, man, what are you doing? Even when it gets to children, we sometimes make a big deal out of it. Now I know they mess the carpet up, and I know it costs a lot of money to clean that up, and it causes a lot of aggravation. Somebody came and did this in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you know, the famous hadith. The Sahaba went to try to stop him. Can you see the various pressures? The sanctity of the masjid is being violated, is being impurified. You can't even come in dirty, and this is impure urine, right? So the sanctity is in your mind. With the Prophet ﷺ, despite all of that, he says, La tuzrimu, hold on, leave him. It's going to be hard. Now he's already done the job. Now he's already doing, it's already been polluted. Now if you try to stop him, try to stop somebody midway, it's actually harmful for them. Who thinks of these things? Who thinks of these things? But the Prophet ﷺ did. He says, look, we'll just put water over it afterwards. And he then explained to him that, look, these masjids, you don't do this kind of stuff here, it's not for that, right? And therefore prayer and so on and so forth. It's just very difficult for us when we need it to be able to deal with it. So anyway, this Zayd ibn Si'na, he says that I had discovered and identified all of the signs except two signs which I mentioned, that the Prophet was extremely forbearing, dominated by his forbearingness, and number two, the more silly you acted with him, the more cool he became, right? So, and I personally believe that the reason he was able to do is because of his tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his reliance in Allah. That was what I think governed all of this. But anyway, he says what happened is, in order to test him in this regard, I went and made a deal with him so that I could find out how he will perform under this pressure. So I paid him for dates. Now the dates were still on the trees. They were still to be grown. So you go and you say to the farmer that I'm going to pay you in advance and I want this many kilos of dates or this many tons of dates or mangoes or wheat or whatever. That's what you call bay'us salam, right? It's like a forward trade. You pay the money in advance and you get the product later. Where generally we get the product first and pay later in credit, right? But it's the other way around. So I did that to a particular date that he was supposed to give me dates by that time. About 2 or 3 days before that date, this was all planned, this was all by design, 2 or 3 days before that date that he was supposed to give me, I went up to him. And I took hold of his tunic. Like I literally took hold of his tunic and of his shawl, his sheet. And I looked at him with a very stern stare, with a harsh look. This is all put on, this is all put on. And I said to him, Ala taqdini ya Muhammad haqqi? Oh Muhammad, aren't you going to give me my right? Now, just imagine somebody did that with us. Somebody's borrowed something, or we owe somebody something, and 2 or 3 days before they come and this harshly, we're going to feel, and it is our right to say, why are you doing this? You got 2 days left. It's completely within our right. Completely within our right. Right? Nobody can even fault you for saying, generally speaking, it's within our right because there was an agreement. Though he has the right to actually ask for it in advance. But I just give you, if you lend money to somebody, not one of these deals, but if you lend money to somebody and you say, give it to me after 2 years, you actually have the right to ask for it the next day. That is the qarz. Yes, it's against promise and all that, but you actually have the right. It's not like now you can't get that money anymore until for 2 years. If you became in need, you can go and ask for that money. It'd be within your right to do so. right? Because that agreement is not obligatory, it's just recommended and nice to live up to. Right? I just want to mention that if somebody doesn't lend you money and then he comes in advance, then don't say, I mean, you can try to persuade him to give you that time and so on, and it is recommended in the Sharia to give people time. And there's a massive reward for giving people more time who can't genuinely pay. But anyway, this is what he does. He looks at him sternly in the face and he says, aren't you going to give me my rights? And then he makes it personal. In those days, to say this would be very bad. It's like saying, man, you Gujaratis are all like this. You Nigerians are all like this. You Punjabis are all like this. Now, that gets even worse, right? One is, then you're getting really personal. He says to him, فَوَاللَّهِ إِنَّكُمْ يَا بَنِي عَبْدِ الْمُطَّلِبِ مَطْلٌ. You guys, you children of Abdul Muttalib, very respectable individual, grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ, your people are always delaying in repayment, which is not true. But if something is not true, then you get even more angry. He's giving him all the reasons to get angry. He's provoking him. Umar radiallahu anhu, he was there to spring up. He says, Adu Allah, oh enemy of Allah. Are you saying what I'm hearing? Like, he was shocked that somebody could be so blatant, so belligerent. فَوَاللَّهِ لَوْلَا مَا أُحَاذِرْ. Like, if it wasn't for what I feared, then I would have struck your head with my sword. That's Umar then straight away. Now, look at the Prophet ﷺ. What do you expect him to do? Now, the Prophet ﷺ, imagine there's somebody who came and done that to you. Umar is saying all of this. The Prophet ﷺ is looking at Umar in a calm, collected manner. He's like looking at him. What are you doing? He's looking at him and he's smiling at him. And he said to him, أنا وهو كنا أحوج إلى غير هذا منك يا عمر. Umar, he and I are in need of something other than what you're saying. That's not what you should be saying. Now, for us, we think, yeah, wonderful. Somebody's defending me. I don't need to do it. Somebody's defending. That sounds nice. When you've got support, it helps in any argument. But no, he said, we need something else from you, Umar. And then he tells him what? He's teaching them. He says, أَن تَأْمُرَنِي بِحُسْنِ الْأَدَاءِ. You should be telling me that yes, you should pay back properly. You should be excellent in your repayment. That's your advice. That should be your advice to me, right? Because Umar may have not known the exact timing and so on as well. He should have just said that that's what the Prophet ﷺ is recommending that he does. And وَتَأْمُرُهُ بِحُسْنِ التَّقَاضِي. And you should have just encouraged him to ask in a better manner, to give more time to deal with it in a more excellent manner. That's what your responsibility is. اذهب به يا عمر. Okay, Umar, go with him, take him. فقده حقه. Go and give him his rights. And زده 20 صاعا مكان ما رعته. Give him 20 measures more than what was the agreement. Now, if that was me and say, like, you've got 2 days left, brother. Right, you've got 2 days left. No, I want it today. Okay, fine, here, take it. And then I'd probably, Allah forgive me, I'm just mentioning this as being the worst itself. But, many of us would say, no, you're going to give it to him, give him the messed up ones. Look at the way he's doing this. To get back at him, because this was all unwarranted. No, the Prophet ﷺ gives him 20 more. 20 more measures. 20 more measures, subhanAllah, 20 more measures. And he did so. So then this Jewish individual, he says, Ya Umar, when he was with Umar, he says, Oh Umar, every single sign of prophethood I had seen in the face of the Prophet, I had observed it in the face of the Prophet ﷺ, except these two. And I had not even been told that it had happened before. So that's why I tested him. I make you witness now that I am now satisfied with Allah as my Lord, with Islam as my deen, and Muhammad ﷺ as my Prophet. That was a tough sale, but the Prophet ﷺ did it. Another occasion, similar occasion, another desert Arab I mean, we are picking on desert Arabs today, but they highlight our case because, to be honest, anybody who's going to deal with us foolishly is just one of those. Right? That's what you have to think about. Then it gets a bit easier. Right? That's why Allah tells us in the Quran that when you address an ignorant person, say salam, salam, deal with salam, say salam, just peacefully deal with it and avoid it. Just slip through it without causing issues. Anyway, this hadith is related by Imam Bazzar, and Haythami mentions it as well. Another Arabi came to the Prophet ﷺ and says, "Can you give me something? Like, I need some help." So the Prophet ﷺ gave him something. And then for some reason the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ahsantu ilayk?" Like, have I done you well? Have I treated you well? I don't know why he asked him that, but he asked him that. So this desert Arab, they were very blatant. They said, "No, you didn't. And you didn't do it well either. Like, you didn't act gracefully." So the Muslimin who were around them, the believers who were sitting there, they stood up. But the Prophet ﷺ indicated to them to sit down, like, take it easy. Right? I'm dealing with this. And then the Prophet ﷺ went into his house. This was outside, in the masjid most likely. Then he went inside his house. And he then called for this desert Arab and he sent him some more. He gave him some more. And then he said to him, "Have I done you well now?" And he said, "Yes, now you've done me well. May Allah reward you on behalf of the entire family and in behalf of the entire tribe. May Allah now reward you on behalf of everybody." So then the Prophet ﷺ said, "Now remember, this is a private discussion because that was public and now this is private." He said to him that, "You said what you said earlier, and the companions, my companions, they have a feeling in their heart about this, right? They're troubled by this. If you wish, you should say this now in front of them. What you just said to me, you should go and say it to them, repeat it to them, until whatever's in their heart disappears." The Prophet doesn't like to keep grudges, and doesn't like grudges to be kept by other people. So he said, "Okay, fine." They were very straightforward people. See, this how they look. They were very straightforward people like that. So the Prophet ﷺ then said that, went out and he said, "This Bedouin, he said what he said, I gave him some more, and now he claims that he's satisfied. Now he claims that he's satisfied. Is it like that? Is that true?" He said to the Arabi, and he said, "Yes, and may Allah reward you now on behalf of the family and on behalf of the tribe." Now, the reason the Prophet ﷺ did this was to teach people a lesson. So he gave them now a nasiha and a counseling. He said to them that my example and the example, my encounter with this Bedouin, this example of my encounter is just like a person who has a camel, who owns a camel, who is acting tyrannically and violently. It's kind of gone off on one of those. And camels do have that propensity sometimes to do that. They can be very stubborn. Most of the time they're fine, but in those rare occasions when they become nobodies, right? So if somebody like that happened, people followed it up. People followed that camel. He's using an example of a camel. And by them following the camel, it only makes that camel more wild and want to run. It's not helpful to go and follow that camel and try to bring it back in this case. So then the owner of the camel turns to them and says that, "Look, you guys leave it. I know what this camel is all about. I've got a special relationship with this camel. If there's anybody that can deal with this camel, it's me." So he tells them to step aside. He goes, speaks to it, convinces it, brings it back, ties it up, and now he's able to get on it and it's back to normal. And the Prophet ﷺ said that you are just like this. If I had left him alone, you guys would have killed him. But that's why I did what I did, and what he did was actually gave him extra. So sometimes you have to give love, you have to give something extra to try to calm them down. You mustn't think that, hey, I gave them their right and they're still angry. Sometimes giving them more is the answer. And we learn this from the Prophet ﷺ. Now, to finish off, I'm just going to mention one more incident. However, actually, I'm going to mention one more story. But there are two places that if you want to see the clemency and the forbearance of the Prophet ﷺ, then you can't get a better example than two examples. One is the example of the conquest of Makkah. Now remember, this is a place that they've been chased out of, persecuted, numerous people killed, battles ensuing afterwards. The main people behind those battles, Abu Sufyan, Hind, his wife, who had chewed on the liver of the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Hamza radiallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ, when entering Makkah Mukarramah, who could do this? He says that anybody who enters into Abu Sufyan's house, it becomes a sanctuary. And then those people become Muslim, both of them. And later Hind says, that woman says, that your family, your household was the worst in our sight. Today becomes the most beloved in our sight. Acts of kindness do help. They do help, it may take a while. That is one example. I'm not going to go into that because those stories about the conquest of Makkah are well known. So I don't like to repeat it and bore you. But you can think about those points. Number two, the other incident which is important is of the biggest troublemaker during the time of the Medinan period. You know who he is? Abdullah ibn Ubay bin Salul. He was tipped to be the next leader of Medina Munawwara. When the Prophet ﷺ came and all the Aus and Khazraj became Muslim, his hopes were dashed. His ambitions went down the drain. And that created huge rancor and resentment. And he would do everything to sabotage. What he did in the battle of, it was during the battle of Uhud. There was already less people compared to the non-Muslim army. He went along with his munafiqeen, his hypocrites, and before they could reach there, he demoralized the army by retreating with his group, which were about 1/3 of the army. Now, how do you feel? How would you feel if you were going and you felt you had this many men, which was less to start with, and then suddenly 1/3 of your army deserts you? So huge sabotage like that. Another one, during the battle of Banu Mustaliq, he mentioned a statement. He says that when we go back, indirectly he says, when we go back, the honorable among us are going to evict the despicable among us. And he meant the Prophet ﷺ by that. His son even took offense to that because his son was a true believer. Now while he supported his father as a father, when he said this, he himself went and confronted his father and he says, you must take this word back. That's the kind of stuff he would do. But that same son, when his father died, and also another thing that his father was responsible for, you know the story of Ifk, when Aisha radiallahu anha was slandered as having committed zina. And that caused so much trouble to the Prophet ﷺ, the entire family and all the Muslimin, until numerous verses came down to exonerate her, which worked out well for her in hindsight. But it was Abdullah ibn Ubay bin Salul who did this, who was one of the main guys in spreading those rumors. Despite all of that, there's so many other stories, but despite that, when he died and his son came to the Prophet ﷺ to say, can you pray on my father? Now he was a munafiq, which meant outwardly he was expressing faith, so you can't call him a kafir. Though inside they all knew that he was not a believer. Not only that, he asked the Prophet ﷺ for a garment of his that he could put into the grave of his father. And the Prophet ﷺ gave it to him. Would you give it to somebody? Would you give something like that? Why would the Prophet ﷺ do that? To be honest, he had nothing to lose. Everything was in the hands of Allah and he knew that. We're too possessive. We're too greedy. We're too resentful. This is our problem. That clemency isn't there. And he went to pray on him. Umar radiallahu anhu protested. He says, you can't pray. La tusalli ala qabri. You can't pray on a munafiq. Prophet said, I'm gonna pray. He went and prayed. Then the verses came down. Do not pray over them. Don't even stand by their graves. Now, the question that arises is that why did the verse come later? Why didn't the verse come before? It came actually in confirming to what Umar did. What Umar radiallahu anhu said. But Prophet ﷺ prayed and then the command came down. Why? Because when the Prophet ﷺ had said it, I'm gonna pray, Allah ﷺ said, okay, let him pray. Then I'll do it afterwards. That is just their love between them. This is just this amazing thing. And finally, the final story. After the conquest of Makkah, most people were forgiven. There was a general amnesty, right? As you know, if Abu Sufyan is forgiven and people entering his house are safe, then imagine. But there were a few earmarked people who were active in their opposition, right? Who were active, and a lot of them were poets, or a lot of them were critics. One of them, does any of you know this Jahili poetry people, Imran al-Qais and Zuhair ibn Sulma? These are some of the greatest of the poets of the Jahili times. Their language is amazing. All right. Now this particular one, Zuhair ibn Sulma, he had two sons. They were both poets as well. One of them, Bujayd ibn Zuhair, he became Muslim. He was with the Prophet ﷺ. His brother Ka'b ibn Zuhair, he would criticize the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ had never seen him, he'd never seen the Prophet ﷺ. But he would criticize him. What happened then is that when Makkah was overcome, everything was in the hands of the Muslims now. So some of these individuals, they ran off far and wide because they didn't want to be caught. The Muslim brother Bujayd wrote to his brother to say, look, the Prophet ﷺ is a very compassionate individual. If you ask for forgiveness, you will be forgiven. But there was too much resentment. His brother wrote back to him in a poem. I'm not going to go through those poems. That no, how can I, there's no way that I'm going to be able to do that, this, that and the other. But eventually he discovered that he was alone. There was nobody to support him. His friends, whatever, they all gone, finished. Even people like Abu Jahl's son, Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl, had become Muslim. Khalid bin Walid had become Muslim. Abu Sufyan had become Muslim. Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu become Muslim. All of these people had become Muslim. He was left all alone. Finally, he comes to Medina Munawwara and he goes to somebody in the Juhayna tribe who was a friend of his. He went to him in the morning and he said, will the Prophet ﷺ forgive me? And his brother told him the same thing, you will be forgiven. So he says, okay, fine, point me out to him. So it was Fajr time. The person pointed out the Prophet ﷺ to him. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't know who he is. He goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he stood up to the Prophet ﷺ. Then he sat down by him. He took hold of the Prophet ﷺ's hand. Now remember, the Prophet ﷺ doesn't know who he is. Like he's never seen him before. The Prophet ﷺ, he says to the Prophet ﷺ that, Ka'b ibn Zuhair, that critic, he's come to ask you for safety. And he's come repenting and to become Muslim. Would you accept him? This is just some stranger to the Prophet ﷺ asking him about Ka'b ibn Zuhair. And he says, if I bring him along, would you forgive him? And would you accept him? So the Prophet ﷺ said, of course. So then he says, I am Ka'b ibn Zuhair. What a state. Immediately, Ibn Ishaq relates, one of the Ansar quickly got up and he said, Ya Rasulullah, leave me to this enemy of Allah and I will take care of him. Right? One of the Ansar. None of the Muhajirin said anything, but the Ansar said that. Then Ka'b ibn Zuhair produces this beautiful poem. It's called Banat Su'ad. It's one of the classics of the Arabic language. And it is a wonderful poem. We're not going to be able to do the whole thing, but I'll just read a few words to you. He starts off and he says, بانت سعاد فبقلب اليوم متبول متيم إثرها لم يفت مكبول يسعى الغواة جنابيها وقولهم إنك يبن أبي سلمى لمقتول. People were telling me that you're going to be killed. وقال كل صديق كنت آمله. Every friend of mine that I had some hope in said لا ألهينك إني عنك مشغول لا أبا لكم فكل ما قدر الرحمن مفعول. He says, okay, fine, I'll make my own way, and whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed, that will happen. And then in between he says, نبئت أن رسول الله أوعدني والعفو عند رسول الله مأمول. And he says, I've been told that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has warned about me, but forgiveness by him is hoped. And then he says the famous words, إن الرسول لنور يستضاء به مهند من سيوف الله مسلول في عصبة من قريش قال قائلهم ببطن مكة لما أسلموا زالوا فما زال أنكاس ولا كشف عند اللقاء ولا ميل مغازيل يمشون مشي الجمال الزهري يعصمهم ضرب إذا عرض السود التنابيل شم العرانين أبطال لبوسهم من نسج داود في الهيجا سرابيل. Even for those who understand Arabic, this is very complex. It's called the lamia because every ending of the line is in lam, li, lu, all the way through. So it's called the lamia. The last few lines that are relevant, the messenger is a light, a source of light, an Indian blade, a drawn sword of God's swords. The best swords in those days came from India, right? The subcontinent, the metal, right? Amid Quraysh's companions, when they chose Islam in Mecca's veil, men said, "Be gone." They went, not weaklings, not as men that flee, swaying upon their mounts and poorly armed, but heroes proud and noble of mien, bright clad, in mail of David's weave for the encounter. As soon as he finished this poem, poems are very effective, if only we could understand what they mean. The Prophet ﷺ took off his mantle, his burda, his mantle, his tunic, and he put it over his shoulders in appreciation. This is an enemy he gives him now. You know what the most wonderful thing about this is? Then the Prophet ﷺ departs his world. This Ka'b ibn Zuhayr is around as a Muslim and he's got this burda, right? Which is obviously a very envied possession. Muawiyah radiallahu anhu becomes the Khalif. He offers him 10,000 dirhams for it. He refuses. When he dies, Muawiyah offers his inheritors, his children, whoever they were, 20,000, they sell it to him. Thus this tunic, this burda, this mantle, it comes down among the leaders of the Muslimin. You know where it is today? It's in the Topkapi Palace in Turkey. You can't see it. When you go there, you can see everything else, but you can't see that. It's in that special room where for several hundred years, while the Ottoman Caliphate was in power, they had 24 hours somebody reciting Quran in that room. Basically, this mantle is in a number of layers of cloth in a very specially crafted, designed and adorned box, which is in a larger chamber, and that's in a room. The only time they open this is like on some special nights for very special people. It's not something you can go and see. There's a picture of it that you can see, a full picture of it, probably online you can find it, but it's in a book called The Sacred Relics. They've got a nice picture. It's like this qadr material, this like rough brown material with a lining. And it's this beautiful thing. I would love to just be able to see that because I have some ideas of what I can do with this, right? But recently Erdogan went to see, and there's a video of him opening the layers just of the cloth, and it's in there. But the Ottomans, they respected this kind of stuff so much that for their rule, there's several hundred years of rule, and they were the longest reigning dynasty in the world, in the history of the world, not just Muslims, but generally. They had somebody reciting Quran for 24 hours a day in that room. And you get a lot of barakah, you know, they think you get a lot of barakah with this. Now they do it for about 12 hours, so you still see somebody reciting, right? But that is down there, that is that same, Wallahu alam, that is the same Banat Su'ad, the one that was from Banat Su'ad. So this basically tells you the Prophet ﷺ is dealing with friends, he's dealing with his servants, he's dealing with his wives, and he's dealing with his enemies. I'm sure we can learn hugely from this. These things are nice to know, but they only become useful when they become our trait. That's why people like Ibn Khaldun would say that it's very easy to give a lot of talk about helping the poor, but when you actually see a poor person, are you able to act the act? It's easy to give money, but can you actually deal with poor people and make them feel comfortable? Likewise, we can hear about forbearance and clemency and all the rest of it. And of course, it's only by listening to more of this that we will, inshallah, be inspired and learn from this. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq, because we need to really show a lot more of this to counter some other narratives that are out there. May Allah grant us the ability to do this. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillah.